By the end of the week, my boss had lost his biggest client presentation, the new hire had quit on day 3, and the quarterly board slides had gone out with a pie chart that added up to 112% and a graph labeled with the wrong quarter. I did not do any of that. I just did exactly what I was paid to do. Nothing more, nothing less. Donald had told me, in front of every person I worked with, to stay in my lane. So I stayed in it. And it turns out that when you stop doing everyone else's job for free, the entire floor stops functioning in ways nobody had fully understood until the moment it happened. Let me take you back to the Monday morning when Donald decided to make an example of me in front of 30 people. My name is Thomas. I had been at Meridian Consulting for 3 years when this happened. 3 years is enough time to understand how a workplace actually operates versus how it looks on paper. On paper, I was an entry-level data analyst. My job description, as written in the document I had signed when I was hired, covered data cleaning and preparation, report generation in specified formats, coordination with the analytics team on assigned projects, and attendance at weekly department reviews. That was the job I was hired to do. That was the job I was paid to do. Here is a partial list of what I was actually doing: fixing April's spreadsheets when they broke, which was approximately twice a week, polishing Donald's client-facing presentations before every major meeting, which he delivered without attribution and which were, by this point, the reason those presentations looked professional, training every new hire who had come through the department in the past 2 years, because Sandra had at some point decided I was the most efficient person to do it. And I had never said no, troubleshooting the shared database when it threw errors because I had built the workaround 18 months ago and was the only person who fully understood it, and serving as the informal technical support for about half the floor because I was good at it, I was fast, and saying yes to people is a hard habit to break when you've been doing it for 3 years. None of this was in my job description. None of it was compensated. All of it was necessary for the floor to function the way the floor functioned. I did it because I believed, with the particular sincerity of someone who has not yet had that belief corrected in a sufficiently public and humiliating way, that doing more than was expected of you was how you built a reputation, earned trust, and eventually got rewarded for being the person who kept things running. I had been believing this for 3 years. On Monday morning of the 4th week of Q3, Donald corrected my belief in front of the entire department. He did it with a laugh. The Monday meeting was a quarterly review. Conference room B, glass walls, everyone present. Donald ran these meetings with the specific efficiency of a man who had decided that authority was most effectively demonstrated not by competence, but by the management of other people's visibility. I had attended enough of these to know the rhythm. Donald presented. Donald summarized. Donald opened the floor for 4 minutes at the end. Donald wrapped up. I had also spent the previous weekend, both days, about 11 hours total, building a workflow diagram that I believed could reduce our report processing time by approximately 30%. I had not been asked to do this. I did it because I saw the problem, I knew the solution, and I had been operating under the assumption that this was the kind of thing that got you noticed. I raised my hand during the open floor section. Donald acknowledged me. I stood up and held up the diagram and said I had been looking at our reporting workflow and thought there might be a restructuring that could save the team meaningful time each cycle. I had gotten approximately 40 seconds into the explanation when Donald spoke. "Let's not work above our pay grade, shall we, Tom?" He said it with a laugh. Not a loud one, just enough. The kind of laugh that is calibrated to land in the room without being so obvious that it becomes the thing people remember rather than a detail they absorb. I watched the people around the conference table in the 2 seconds that followed. 3 people looked at their laptops. 2 looked at me with the expression of people who were grateful not to be where I currently was. One person, Marcus, from the Harrington account team, looked at Donald with an expression I filed away for later. Donald continued, "Entry level, not management. You need to learn your place. Do what you're paid to do. Nothing more, nothing less." He moved to the next slide. "Stay in your lane, Thomas." I set the folder down on the table. I said, "Okay." He practically glowed. "See how easy that is. Everyone doing their assigned tasks. No overstepping." He moved on. I sat for the remaining 8 minutes of the meeting with the folder in front of me and the diagram inside it, and I thought, with a calm that surprised me for how complete it was, "All right, exactly my lane. Not an inch to either side. I want to be specific about what I decided in that room because the specificity matters. I did not decide to be obstructionist. I did not decide to engineer anything. I decided to do my job, the job that was written in the document I had signed, the job I was compensated for, and to redirect everything outside that scope to whoever was actually designated to handle it. This was not rebellion. This was the most literal possible compliance with a direct instruction from my supervisor, delivered in front of 30 witnesses. Donald had asked me, explicitly and publicly, to do only what I was paid to do. I was going to give him exactly that. The consequences that followed were not something I designed. They were already there, waiting, underneath the surface of a floor that had been running on invisible labor for years. The first test came at 8:47 the next morning. April from accounting has worked at Meridian for 6 years. She is good at her job in every respect except one. Spreadsheets do things to April that they do not do to other people. Formulas that work correctly for everyone else develop opinions in April's documents. Reference ranges shift. Pivot tables refuse to pivot. I had been the person she called about this for 2.5 years. The routine was established enough to have a texture. She'd appear at my desk with her laptop open. I'd identify the problem in a few minutes, fix it while she stood there. She'd thank me, she'd leave. It usually took under 10 minutes. It was a small, pleasant, completely informal arrangement that existed entirely outside both of our job descriptions. She appeared at my desk at 8:47 with her laptop open, and the particular expression of someone who has already done something wrong and is hoping I can make it not have happened. I kept typing without looking up. Sorry, April. Spreadsheet issues go to tech support. She made a sound. Thomas, I have an 11 o'clock. I know. But Donald made it clear yesterday that I need to stay within my role. Spreadsheet troubleshooting isn't in my job description. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you've literally always handled this. I know. That was me working outside my scope. Donald corrected that yesterday. The expression on her face moved through disbelief, then something that looked almost like recognition, then settled into something I hadn't seen April's face do before. Genuine concern. Not about the spreadsheet. About the larger shape of what was happening. She went back to her desk and submitted a ticket to tech support. Tech support resolved it 68 hours later, which was 40 minutes after the 11 o'clock had passed. I know because she told me. She told me specifically so that I would know the number. Donald arrived at my desk at 2:15 that afternoon with his laptop open. I want to describe this arrival accurately because the details matter. He came around the corner with a particular stride of a man who was accustomed to having requests fulfilled and had not yet registered that anything had changed. His laptop was open to a PowerPoint file I recognized immediately. I had built the template for that file myself a year and a half earlier because the client-facing presentations had been going out looking like they'd been assembled by someone who had been told what a slide was but had never personally operated one. Since building the template, I had been polishing Donald's presentations before every major meeting. He would send me the draft the day before. I would spend an hour or two fixing the fonts, correcting the color usage, cleaning up the graphs, tightening the layout, and send it back. He would deliver it. The arrangement was never discussed. It was simply the way things worked, in the same category as everything else I had been doing that was not in my job description. Understood, relied upon, unremarked. He put the laptop on the corner of my desk with the screen angled toward me. Need you to clean this up for tomorrow. Harrington. Harrington was one of Meridian's largest accounts. I looked at the screen. The slides were in the state they were always in before I touched them. Inconsistent font sizes, approximate color palette, 2 graphs that were technically accurate but visually implied conclusions the underlying data did not support, and at least one data label that referenced a different quarter than the one being presented. That's design work, I said. Outside my role. He looked at me. You've been doing my slides since you started. I know. That was me working above my pay grade. You were right yesterday. He was recalibrating. I could see it happening. Harrington is critical. Then you should handle it yourself or bring in the design team. He stood there for 60 seconds. I counted, watching the clock at the bottom of my screen, and then he picked up the laptop and walked away without saying anything further. Priya, who sat 3 desks over and had been monitoring the conversation while pretending to be on a call, told me afterward that he went directly to the design team's shared calendar, found them fully committed through the following week, and then went into his office and did not come out for 45 minutes. She knew because she had been watching. Several people had been watching. The presentation happened the next morning at 9 a.m. Donald delivered it himself. I was not in the room. What I know about what happened inside it comes from Marcus, who appeared at my desk 48 hours later and told me, in the careful way that people tell you things they want documented without wanting to be the one who documented them, that the slides had contained a pie chart whose segments summed to 112%, a graph labeled Q2 that contained Q3 data, and an overview slide in which one bullet point had been duplicated and another was missing entirely. The Harrington representatives had noticed the pie chart within the first 5 minutes. Donald had described it as a formatting issue being addressed internally. Marcus looked at me for a moment after finishing the summary. I looked at my screen. Neither of us said anything further. Kevin arrived on Wednesday. He was 23, first professional job, showed up in a button-down that was slightly too large in the shoulders and carrying a padfolio with a legal pad inside that still had the price sticker on the back cover. Sandra brought him through the floor on the standard orientation walk, and when she got to my area, she said what she always said, "Thomas is your person. He'll show you how everything actually works." I had heard this introduction 5 times. Each of the 5 times, I had spent between half a day and 2 full days walking someone new through the systems, the documented ones and the undocumented ones, the official processes and the workarounds, the things you needed to know that nobody had written down because the person who knew them had always just been available to tell you. Kevin looked at me with a specific expression of someone who has just been shown the life raft and is already swimming toward it. "Training is a supervisor function," I said. "It's not in my job description." Sandra looked like I'd said something in a language she didn't speak. "Thomas, you've trained the last 5 people we brought on." "I know. That was me working above my pay grade." Donald corrected that on Monday. Kevin was still standing there, holding the padfolio. His expression had changed from relieved to uncertain to something I can only describe as a drift, the look of someone who had just had the floor removed from under their first real job. Sandra said she'd look into the onboarding process and let him away. He glanced back at me once before they turned the corner. I went back to my data. Kevin's manager, a project lead named Greg, who was responsible for onboarding new analysts but had, in practice, never actually done it, attempted to run Kevin through the systems on Thursday morning. Greg had not personally done a system walkthrough in 2 years because I had been doing them. Greg's walkthrough lasted 40 minutes and covered approximately 30% of what Kevin needed to know, focusing primarily on the parts Greg himself still used regularly. Kevin submitted 3 support tickets that afternoon for access issues that would normally have been resolved during a proper onboarding. 2 of the tickets were routed to IT. One was routed to Donald because it involved a permissions level that required manager authorization. Donald resolved it on Friday at 4:55 p.m., Kevin's exit interview, which happened on Friday at 3 p.m. Before the ticket was resolved, cited unclear onboarding procedures and insufficient role support during the critical first week. Sandra told me this on Monday morning. She did not ask me anything directly. She simply told me, and then walked away. The database situation happened on Thursday and is the part of the story I am most careful about telling, because it is the part where I came closest to a decision I wasn't entirely comfortable with. The shared database threw an error at 11:23 Thursday morning. I know the exact time because I was the one who saw it first. It affects a report queue I monitor as part of my actual job description. The error was one I recognized immediately. It was the same class of error I had been patching with a workaround I'd built 18 months earlier, and required a specific intervention in a specific sequence that I had documented for myself but never formally shared with anyone, because I'd always been the one handling it. The formal fix was something I could do in about 8 minutes. The workaround was something I could do in about 4. Without one of those 2 things, the report queue would back up and the afternoon output would be delayed by approximately 3 hours. I looked at the error for a moment. I thought about what Donald had said. I thought about the fact that the report queue was, in fact, within my job description, data analyst, report generation. The database was infrastructure. Infrastructure was IT's responsibility. I submitted a ticket to IT at 11:26 and noted the error code. IT's standard response time for non-critical infrastructure issues was 4 hours. The queue backed up. The afternoon output was delayed by 2 hours and 40 minutes, which was slightly better than my estimate because one of the IT technicians happened to be available and recognized the error class from a previous incident. The technician who resolved it came to my desk afterward and asked if I had documentation on the workaround. I said yes and shared it with him. It is now in the IT knowledge base. This is probably how it should have been from the beginning. The Harrington account sent a follow-up request on Thursday afternoon. Marcus brought it to me directly. He sat down in a chair next to my desk and said, "I need something specific." The Harrington team wants a clean data summary before their Friday decision meeting. They want it corrected and formatted properly. He paused. I know things are different this week, but this is in your actual scope, right? Data and reports. I pulled up the project parameters. Data summary, specified format, specified metrics. It was squarely within my job description. Send me the parameters and I'll have it to you by end of day tomorrow. He looked relieved in a way that told me he hadn't been certain that would be the answer. I built the report Thursday evening and sent it to Marcus at 4:47 p.m. It was accurate, clearly formatted, and covered exactly what the Harrington team had requested. The Harrington account renewed the following Monday. Marcus told me this directly, and he also told me that the account notes attributed the renewal decision in part to the revised data summary, which the client had found more useful than the original presentation. Marcus had written this attribution himself. Donald's name was not in the renewal notes in connection with the data summary. His name appeared elsewhere in the account file, in the section documenting the original presentation and the client's feedback about it. Donald called me into his office on Monday afternoon. He closed the door behind me and sat down behind his desk and was quiet for a moment in a way that told me he had been thinking about how to begin this conversation and had not fully resolved the question. He said, "The Harrington renewal." I said I'd heard. He said, "Marcus told me about the report." I said it had been within my scope. He was quiet again. Then he said, "The presentation was wrong." I said I understood. He said, "Kevin resigned." I said I'd heard. Another pause. He said, "The database outage cost us 3 hours on Thursday." I said the IT team had resolved it, and the fix was now in the knowledge base, which was the appropriate place for it. He looked at me. I looked at him. The silence lasted long enough that I started counting seconds again, the way I had at my desk when he was standing there with his laptop. He got to 12 before he said, "What would it take?" The conversation that followed lasted 43 minutes. I'm not going to tell you all of it because some of it belongs to the negotiation and some of it is between me and the company. All I can tell you is that I walked out of that office with a scheduled meeting with HR for the following week, a written acknowledgement from Donald that my informal contributions had been materially outside my current role and compensation, and the clearest conversation about the actual value of what I did that I had ever had in 3 years at Meridian. The HR meeting happened the following Thursday. The formal review took 3 weeks. When it concluded, I had a new title, a compensation adjustment that reflected what I had actually been doing rather than what was written in my original job description, and an updated job description that included the things I had been doing for free. I trained the next new hire. I did it because it was in my job description now. I fixed the next presentation. I did it because it was in my job description now. I ran the next onboarding walkthrough. I did it because it was in my job description now. I'm not going to tell you Donald became a different person. He didn't. He still runs the quarterly meetings the same way. He still moves to the next slide when someone raises a point he doesn't want to engage with. He still has the laugh. What is different is what he knows about the cost of dismissing people in public, which turns out to be more than he thought, and specifically more than he had budgeted for. What is also different is what I know about the value of what I do, which is it has a number attached to it now, and the number is correct. There is something I want to say directly, because I think it is the most important part of this story, and I have been building toward it since the beginning. I did not win because I was clever. I did not win because I engineered a perfect plan. I won, if winning is the right word, and I'm not sure it fully is, because I stopped subsidizing a system that was taking the subsidy for granted. Every floor has people who do more than their job description says they should. Most of the time, those people do it for the same reason I did, because they believe that doing more is how you earn more. Sometimes that belief is correct. Sometimes the people above you notice, recognize, and reward it. And sometimes a person like Donald tells you, in front of 30 witnesses, that doing more is inappropriate overstepping, and he says it with a laugh because he thinks it will land that way. When that happens, the correct response is not to fight. It is not to storm out. It is not to immediately send your resume to 3 competitors, although I did begin doing that on Monday evening as a separate track, just as a matter of prudence. The correct response is to comply, completely professionally, and to the exact letter of the instruction. Do exactly what you are paid to do. Nothing more, nothing less. And then wait for the floor to show everyone in the room what was living in the space between what the job description says and what actually keeps the place running. It doesn't take long. It took me a week. The diagram I built that weekend is still in a folder on my desktop. I never did present it in the way I had planned. But 3 months after the Monday meeting, the process improvement team lead stopped by my desk and said she had heard I had some thoughts on the reporting workflow and asked if I would be willing to share them. I said yes. The restructuring rolled out in Q2. It reduced report processing time by 28%, which was close to my original estimate. My name was in the project acknowledgement email. The title under my name was the new one. I stayed in my lane. It turned out the lane was wider than Donald thought it was. It just needed the right label. Recommended Microsoft Azure Neural Voice, GUI Neural, dry composed with a slight wry undertone that never tips into comedy. Handles deadpan delivery cleanly, which is exactly what this narrator needs. Someone describing chaos with complete calm because he caused none of it. Davis Neural, slightly younger, good if you want the narrator to feel more peer level with the audience. The same dry register with a bit more edge. There are things that happened in those 5 days that I haven't fully described because they exist in the margins of the main events and are harder to organize into a clean sequence. Let me try to get at some of them. On Tuesday evening, after April's spreadsheet situation and before Donald's presentation request, I got a message on the internal chat system from a project manager named Elise who worked on a different floor and whom I knew peripherally through the cross-team database work I'd occasionally been pulled into. She said she had a data validation question and had been told I was the person to ask. I read the message twice. Elise's data validation question was exactly the kind of thing I would normally have handled in 10 minutes without thinking about it. It was also clearly outside my scope. I replied that data validation for cross-team projects would need to go through her own analytics contact or the central data team. She replied with a question mark. I replied that I hoped the central data team could help her quickly. I closed the chat window. I sat at my desk for a moment after doing this. Elise had done nothing wrong. She had been told I was the person to ask, which I had been until Monday. Redirecting her felt different from redirecting April or declining to train Kevin, because Elise didn't know what had happened in conference room B. To her, I was just being unhelpful for no apparent reason. I thought about sending a follow-up explanation. I didn't because I wasn't sure how to explain it without saying things that should be said to Donald rather than to Elise. I hoped the central data team was faster than IT. I don't know if they were. Elise and I have not worked together since. Priya stopped by my desk on Wednesday afternoon. Priya had been watching the week's events with the focused attention of a scientist monitoring an experiment she hadn't expected to see performed in her lifetime. She sat down and looked at me for a moment and then said, "Are you okay?" I said yes. She said, "Donald was wrong on Monday." I said I knew. She said, "Everyone in that room knew." I said I knew that too. She said, "Greg is completely lost with Kevin. He's been calling me for things he doesn't know how to explain." I said I was sorry to hear that. She said, "You know, this isn't going to fix itself without you doing something, right?" I said I thought Donald was going to do something. She looked at me. "You think he's going to apologize?" I said I didn't think that was quite the right word for what I was expecting. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, well, whatever happens. Monday was wrong. She went back to her desk. It was one of the shorter conversations of the week and also one of the ones I've thought about most since. Priya had nothing to gain from saying that to me. She said it anyway. Greg, the project lead who had attempted to run Kevin's onboarding, came to my desk on Thursday with the expression of a man who has been given a task he does not know how to complete and has finally, reluctantly, decided to ask for help. He sat down. He said, the Kevin situation. I waited. He said, I know you're doing the thing. I said I was doing my job. He said, right? I know. I'm not saying you're wrong. He paused. I just need to know. Is there documentation somewhere for the onboarding process? Like anything written down? I said the official onboarding documentation was in the HR shared drive under New Employee Resources. He said he looked there. He said the documentation covered things like badge activation and benefits enrollment, but not, for example, how to actually use the database or where the report templates lived or what the unwritten protocols were for the various cross-team workflows. I said that was correct. He said, so it's in your head. I said it had been, and that I had shared the database workaround with IT, and it was now in the IT knowledge base, and that I would be happy to discuss formalizing the onboarding documentation as part of my updated role if that conversation was part of a broader discussion about scope and compensation. He looked at me for a moment. He said, is that what this week is about? I said the week was about doing my job as it was currently defined. He nodded slowly. He went back to his desk. 2 hours later, he sent an email to Donald and Sandra in HR copying me, subject line, onboarding documentation and role clarity, follow-up required. I read it twice. Then I saved it. The one thing I got wrong, and I want to say this clearly because leaving it out would make the story less true, I got the database wrong, or at least ambiguously right. The database error on Thursday was within a system I had been maintaining informally. The queue backup cost the floor time. People's work was delayed. Real work on real deadlines that had nothing to do with the Donald situation. I had submitted the ticket to IT, which was the correct procedural response. But I also knew the fix. I knew it would take IT 3 hours to figure out when I could resolve in 8 minutes, and I chose process over pragmatism. I don't fully regret it. The fix being in the IT knowledge base is genuinely better for the long term. But I also know that 3 hours of queue delay affected people who had not been in conference room beyond Monday and had no stake in what was happening between me and Donald. I have thought about that more than once since. There is a version of staying in your lane that is principled and a version that becomes its own kind of overreach. I try to stay on the right side of that line. I'm not entirely certain I did on Thursday. The Friday before the Monday conversation with Donald, I updated my resume. I sent it to 3 companies. I want to be clear that this was not part of any plan related to the week's events. It was a simple recognition that I had spent 3 years doing more than I was paid for, that this had recently been described by my supervisor as inappropriate, and that whether or not the situation at Meridian resolved itself in a way that worked for me, having current options was the correct thing to do. One of the 3 companies responded. I went to an interview the following week after the conversation with Donald, but before the HR meeting. The interview went well. I received an offer 2 weeks after the HR meeting concluded. The offer was for a role with a different title and a higher salary than the adjusted figure I had negotiated at Meridian. I thought about it carefully for 4 days and then I declined it, because by that point the Meridian situation had been resolved in a way that I found satisfactory, and because I had 3 years of institutional knowledge at Meridian that had value I would be leaving behind. I keep the offer letter in the same folder as the workflow diagram. Not as a threat, just as information. Information has a way of being useful at unexpected moments. Donald said something in the 43-minute conversation that I have not told you about yet because I wasn't sure how to fit it in. Toward the end, after the practical things had been mostly settled and we were in the part of the conversation where the air had changed from negotiation to something slightly less structured, he said, "You should have come to me with the diagram." I thought about how to respond to this for a moment. I said I had brought it to the quarterly review, which was the designated channel for departmental input. He said, "I know. I handled that badly." He said it without particular emphasis. in the flat tone of a man acknowledging a fact rather than an apology, which was what it was, a fact acknowledged, not an apology offered. I said I understood. He said, bring the next one directly. I said I would if it remained within my scope as defined. He looked at me. There was a pause. Then he said, fair enough. That was the closest we came to talking about Monday directly. It was enough. It was probably as much as either of us was going to get from that conversation, and I had learned by that point in the week to take what was there rather than waiting for what I thought should be there. I stayed. The team lead came by about the diagram 3 months later. The workflow rolled out in Q2. The number in my bank account on the first of the following month was different from the number that had been there the month before, and the difference was the distance between what I had been worth and what I had been paid, and that distance had a name now, and the name was in a document with both of our signatures on it. Some things are better after you've made them visible. Not all of them, but this one was.